going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Speaking Sessions podcast. I got Adam Dupuis here. I just had to ask him how to pronounce that because it is Dupuis. I said Dupuis, and of course he's from New Orleans, Louisiana, and that's not how they say that down there. They always have to say everything way crazy. But anyways, so Adam, we got him here. He's the dude that's all things barbecue. He transitioned from there into firewood sales, so selling firewood to both personal homes as well as commercial restaurants. And then he ended up creating a subscription box around all things barbecue. So it's really cool stuff that he's got going on. We met through Apex, and I'm excited to talk to him today about how his speaking journey has came along, how he's gotten on a couple of stages, as well as how speaking helps him with the subscription boxes and how he differentiates himself from the rest of the firewood guys down there in Louisiana and then throughout the country as he works with his subscription box and makes that bigger and better. But Adam, man, glad to have you on the show.
Glad to be here, dude. We've been talking about doing this for a hot minute
Yeah, I know you had to go change some tires before we got on here, so
now.
you're nice and looking real manly. I mean, we think about when you think about a manly person, you think about somebody that uses a chainsaw and chops up wood and stuff, or cuts up wood, and that's definitely you. And you got the beard to go with it and everything.
Yeah, it's just not cool enough for the jeans and work boots and flannel yet.
Man, oh, you'll get there one day, man. You'll be like Paul Bunyan soon enough, right?
In about 3 weeks when it's like
Yeah,
40 degrees outside and I can actually bear it.
there you go. Except for I'm sure some listeners that are like, really, 40 degrees? You think that's cold?
No, but it's cool enough I can get away with wearing my comfortable clothes.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But man, how are things going for you with the subscription box and everything? Tell me a little bit about that. How did that all happen? Or tell us a little bit about your background and let's get into that subscription box. I think that's a pretty interesting thing. You don't hear everybody talk about how they have one every day.
Man, yeah, that's a whole journey in and of itself. So I started a firewood company because a friend of mine who was an arborist begged me to get into it. And
What's
I
an
was like, all right.
arborist? I don't know what that is. You got the layman's terms
So
for me, man.
they are professional tree cutters essentially, usually
Okay.
residential and commercial. That's what he did was he would go do tree trimmings and also tree removals and stump grinding and things like that. But he did firewood on the side. So he was like, dude, you gotta do this, you gotta do this. And he sold me on the dream. So I started delivering firewood in December of 2018. And before I knew it, by January, I got my first restaurant. Before the end of January, we had four restaurants. By mid 2019, we had about a dozen. And I got introduced through the first one to my buddy James, and James is a nationally ranked competitor in barbecue.
Mm.
So he's taken trophies all around the country, including walking the stage at least twice at Memphis in May, which is the national championship.
Oh
And
wow.
James just kept introducing me to these guys, and I became the guy for firewood when it came to these barbecue competition guys. We have a big charity event every year called Hogs for the Cause, and I supply about 8 teams for that annually. And yeah, so when that all that was right before COVID. When COVID hit, I told my friend, I was like, dude, I want to get into e-commerce. And we were initially going to just do like an online store that would support the firewood company. And we ended up morphing that through about 4 to 6 weeks into a totally separate brand. And it ended up being a subscription box. And that one's Prime Barbecue Club. And
Mm.
it works with only award-winning rubs, sauces, and marinades, and you get 3 products shipped to your front door every single month.
Okay. Man, so that's pretty cool. And it's always nice when you got a friend that's well known in the industry that kind of helps get you in that door for sure.
Yeah, dude, James was a lifesaver. Like, and I basically served them like that was my only customer in the world, and he would be out in the parking lot just calling people up while I was standing next to him, like, "Hey, you need a firewood guy? Like, I got a guy. I got a wood guy. I got a wood guy. I got the best guy in town."
Hmm. Man, so that's definitely been something that, and obviously that's kind of how we connected through the same thing through Apex, obviously, which is a mastermind group we're a part of. But just through that giving of value, we hopped on a call and it was supposed to be like a 30-minute call. It turned into like 2 or 2.5 hours, and then you told me later that happened with like the next two calls that you had or something like that. Not same day, but different days. So
Yeah, over
you're
the
all
next few
about
weeks.
yeah, yeah. So you're all about giving that value for sure. And so how has that really helped you? I think that's an important thing that a lot of people don't take into account, especially and really even within our group sometimes. And I'm guilty of that. And even in the corporate world, we see that where it's like back to back to back to back to back meetings. So you're just getting started having a conversation, and it's like, well, I got to hop off. I got to get on this other call. And actually, that's kind of funny because somebody called me up. We were kind of chatting. It was a little weird. I'll save the story for another time. But we were trying to chat during the day, and then finally he called me up, and he was just like, "Hey, man, sorry about that. Just crazy stuff going on right now." And we were talking. I'm like, well, man, I gotta go. I gotta get on this podcast." So it was like I gotta do the same thing. But I say all that to like, how has having that good communication with people helped you out?
Dude, I mean, shameless plug to Apex because Apex is where it's at, like for real. Um, and actually, I'll give you a funny story about that. Before you and I connected, I went to my first Apex event back in May, and I met
Mhm.
Zach Williams. And me, Zach Williams, and Greg were all sitting around. We're having beers, and well, I wasn't. I was on 75 hard. They're
Mhm.
having beers and wings, and Zach's asking me all these questions about the firewood. And I gave him the full blueprint. He's like, "Bro, you don't have to give me anything proprietary." And I was like, "There's nothing proprietary." I said, "Anyone could go out and start it tomorrow." I said, "But I know no one's going to do it because no one else is willing to do the work." And so
Mm.
I've never been afraid to share like every single little nut, bolt, and twist and turn in the plot because that's just the truth. Like no one else is going to go out and do the work. I told you right before we hopped on this call, like I'm advising two other people within Apex on how to create their own subscription boxes. I gave them the first 10 steps already, and you know, they're both very nice women. And if they choose to go forward, then sure, it'd be great. And I'll keep working with them and I'll do whatever I can to help them. Um, but only time will tell if they take those first 10 steps or not.
Yeah, yeah. I know we were talking about it a little bit too, as well, with the speaking coaching. We haven't found out a way, or at least I haven't. I know where it's not necessarily that part. You're just willing to help me out, but you're not willing to. I shouldn't say you're not willing, but you're not investing that effort into helping me figure out what could be a subscription box around public speaking. So I got to think of something. So for those of you listening, if you have an idea, I would love to hear that idea, because I definitely would like to come back to Adam to be like, hey, this is what we're going to do. And then him help me out from there. But yeah, that's awesome that you do that. And I think that goes into a lot like communication. A lot of people, when they get into speaking, they're so worried about, man, if I share every single thing that I know, people aren't going to want to work with me. But
Dude,
it
it's
seems to
the
be the opposite for
opposite.
you. Yeah.
It is totally the opposite. Like I said, I gave them the first 10 steps that the consultants that we hired gave us. And I paid $25,000 to get those first 10 steps.
Mm,
Like, and it's pretty simple. It's more or less Google, go to Google Domains, you buy your domain, you can register a professional email right then and there. You build a Shopify store. There's a couple of different apps that we have installed that take care of the subscription itself. Like, it's all pretty basic stuff. It's not anything you couldn't find on the internet. It's just shortening that gap for people. And because you're willing to do that, they're willing to come back to you for more information.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. You're exactly right, man. And in just doing that, how has that helped you with your business? I mean, you're willing to give all this information out. How has this helped you with business and personal relationships? I mean, how has it helped?
It's a blessing and a curse. It's definitely both. Like in some ways, it almost makes you into like a mini celebrity because people just want to come up and talk to you about whatever.
Hmm.
Like I can't go to the gym anymore. Like I can't get out of the gym in less than 2 hours because somebody will come up and they'll start asking me questions. Like my buddy Johnny was asking me how he would smoke meat on a gas grill, and I was like, "Well, dude, you got to get wood chips and you got to put them in foil so that way you don't get the ash in the burner." And he was like, we went down like a 10-minute rabbit hole. And he's like, "Bro, I didn't mean to interrupt your workout." And I was like, "Yeah, I know. I get lost in the rabbit holes myself because I just enjoy talking about it. Like, you
Wow.
know, at this point, everything that it has to do with barbecue, the sauce, the rub, the marinade, the wood, it's become my life. Like, that's how I make my living."
Hmm. Yeah, and I know we've talked about some of it too. I mean, right there, like I would never think about putting wood chips in tin foil so that the ash wouldn't you get get in the grill or whatever exactly you said. Like, clearly, I don't know that much about grilling at all. That's definitely something I'm like I would like to learn, but I know I don't care to put that time investment into that at this point in my life. There's a lot of other things I'd rather invest my time into. So I'm just like, it'd be kind of cool to learn how to grill more or smoke meat and everything. But one of these days, maybe I'll get around to that. We'll see. But it's definitely not a priority for me at this point. But I'm curious. I know you mentioned about being on some stages and getting on stages. Did you speak on barbecue stuff, or was it something completely different?
It was something completely different, actually. I've been in front of crowds long before I even knew what my career was.
Hmm.
So, actually, I think both stages I spoke on were in high school. One was for my high school, and the other one was for my church. And one was a little bit smaller and a little bit more intimate. It was about 60 people. And the
Mm-hmm.
other one was my entire senior class, which was 300, 300 people with the faculty there.
Okay. Yeah, we had about the same graduating class. I think mine might have been like 380, something like that. I can't remember. But yeah, so we had close to the same about. I so it sounds like about the same kind of school. But how was that? How was that? Going into those speeches, how were they?
I mean, it's terrifying. There's, I think everybody, but people like to sit in the fact that it's terrifying,
Mhm,
right? Because
mhm,
what I got up there to talk about was incredibly vulnerable for me. Like, it wasn't something that I wasn't just getting up there and giving a presentation. I think anyone could give a halfway decent PowerPoint presentation in front of a small college class pretty easily.
mhm,
I actually got up there and talked about my brain surgery as a kid and like how that actually affected me,
mm,
and uh, specifically how that had affected my faith. And so both of those were like really kind of vulnerable topics to get into, and not something you typically jump in front of a crowd.
mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it was definitely vulnerable, but it was also eye opening because the amount of people that are willing to like put their arms around you after when you're done really shows you what you had to say delivered a lot of value.
Mm. Man, and I want to get to that point, but I want to ask real quick, go back. You mentioned about it was scary, which I could totally understand that, especially you're talking about, brain injury, and doing that brain surgery and everything. But how did you get past that? What was that trigger inside your head that said, "Well, I'm going to talk about this anyways, even though I'm terrified to talk about people about this."
I didn't really feel like I belonged. So the first one was the smaller of the two.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a church that I grew up going to, but I didn't really know a lot of the kids at my church because our two churches had merged.
Mm.
The Archdiocese of New Orleans decided they were going to shut down a bunch of churches around the city, and they were
Mm-hmm.
combining them. And so there were these kids that went to a different school than me, and every time the director was like, "Oh yeah, well, if you go to Brother Martin, then you probably know so and so, or you probably know this girl, or you probably know this guy." I was like, "I don't know anybody,"
Hmm.
you know. But
Mm-hmm.
she had actually gotten up and giving a giving a talk before the retreat, and
Mm-hmm.
she was really vulnerable about how she almost died and because she got run over by a drunk driver.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I saw that she had the courage to do it, I was like, well, then this is a no-brainer. Actually, I mean, like, why not? Why would I not do this?
Yeah. Man, that's there's so much power right there too. Just the fact that somebody else did it, so you had the courage, and I encourage those in the audience, if you're afraid of doing something, just remember that if you're willing to do it and show that bravery, that you'll probably encourage somebody else to go share a story. And you never know how that story is going to impact other people, which actually goes into what you said about the end of speaking at the events, that people actually came up to you and were talking about that. And so a lot of times what people worry about is, oh man, if I share too much, or if I too personable, that people aren't going to like that, or they're not going to resonate with me, or they're probably going to judge me. There's just all these things that are going on in our head. So a lot of times we hold back and we're reserved on the message that we share. But whenever we actually share it fully, people can actually relate to us because of that vulnerability. And so can you go into some more details about how those interactions were after you gave that speech?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interactions are what you're kind of looking for, but I think the purpose is
Hmm.
what keeps you. The purpose is the trigger, and the interactions are really like the justification for it,
Mm.
and like as to why this was a good idea, right? Like, I've actually gotten on more than those two stages the more that I think about it. And every time I did, it was pretty much the same thing. It was like, well, I'm going to get a little bit vulnerable. I'm going to kind of put myself out there, but I want to show people what's possible. Because if I can show
Mm.
them what's possible, like you're saying, then they can go out and they can do more. Because it's not like what I got up, it's not like that surgery has stopped me from doing anything. I mean, I'm over here
Yeah.
running chainsaws and dirt, big trucks and trailers and heavy equipment and all, and started three or four different companies in my lifetime so far. So I don't want anyone to feel like they can't, and I finished
Mm.
75 hard last year. That's the that was huge.
Yeah, that's a tough mental challenge, or I shouldn't say challenge, but it's a tough mental program to go through.
Yeah, it is. And I feel like public speaking and 75 hard both kind of teach you the same things, which is you're going to do something, it's going to be scary, it's going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to be tough.
Hmm.
However, if you put enough reps in, you'll come out on the other side so much better.
Yeah.
Because I,
Oh
I
yeah.
had every reason to quit 75 hard, and I had every reason to not get on stage. I just did it anyway.
Mm. Yeah, that's a huge thing. Just doing it anyways, and then putting in those reps. Too many people don't think about that. They just want to get immediately better at public speaking. They want to immediately see the results, but it takes repetition. It takes consistency. It takes continuing to take action, no matter what, no matter how you feel, whether you feel good or bad, for you to actually reap the results from that. And just like 75 hard, 75 days. If you're doing something for 75 days and you're doing actually really doing something, not just going through the motions, you're going to see a result, some kind of result. I mean, sometimes it may be minuscule, but there will be some kind of change. And it shouldn't be minuscule if you've done it very diligently for 75 days in a row, but you will see changes in 75 days for sure.
Well, that, and I think people underestimate that our problems are pretty limited, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Like, the big problems you're going to face in your lifetime are probably about a dozen or so. You're going to run out of money. You're not going to be able to put food on the table. You're going to do something really scary. You're going to get injured. Like, there's only so many things. And so, like, we all go through those,
Hmm.
right? Like, I had made a post in Apex about how I injured myself in the gym a couple weeks ago, and I did. I found out I have an inguinal hernia.
Mm.
Like, but because I went in there and I said something and I said how I wasn't gonna let it stop me, Todd, who we both know, Todd Holland went in there and he started talking about how he had done the same thing, but just a different injury.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's amazing how when you share a message like that, and not that you're trying to be like super vulnerable, you were trying to be more motivational to people and like, hey, man, don't let excuses hold you back. Like go do the work anyways, regardless of what's going on. I mean, within reason, obviously. I mean, if you had like broken a leg, I would not suggest that you go try and still do squats or something. But try and do what you can, even with an injury for sure. But you sharing that made other people also share, which goes back to what we just talked about with the messaging. To put that message out there and put it in a way that is personable that people can relate to. And then when they relate to it, they're going to, resonate with it and want to talk with you about that.
Yeah, because if you put the message out there, kind of like we were talking about initially, when you come off stage, you have that weight is off your chest now. You kind of had your own little therapy session,
Hmm.
and people they'll surround you, and they want to tell you about how they did something similar, or maybe they just want to give you a hug, or maybe they just want you to see that they have tears in their eyes because what you said meant a lot to them. I've had all of the
Hmm.
above happen.
Yeah. No, it is crazy how you can something you think that isn't that big of a deal and you share it is such a huge deal to other people. Yeah, and you get them crying too. You're like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that that was gonna make you cry, and you don't mean that, but sometimes creating that emotion is a good thing though, as well. Hopefully, you're making
Right.
people more maybe laugh or it's crying in a good manner, but still, that emotion, if you can draw that out, is such a good thing when it comes to speaking.
Well, it might not be that big of a deal to you. You might have
Hmm.
been living with it your whole life.
Hmm.
You might have lived with this crippling insecurity since this girl broke up with you in freshman year of high school. But when you finally let that out, it it gives people that connection point, and they can
Hmm.
choose to connect with it or they don't. But more often than not, I find that people choose to connect with it.
Yeah. It makes me think of the story that Andy Frisella talks about, and he's like, man, and I know he's talked about this a lot on the podcast or several times that he's like, man, I wish I could find this lady, but there was this lady that he saw in the grocery store, and everybody like, he's got all these scars on his face from getting stabbed and everything, and he was like so embarrassed about it for the longest time, and nobody would want to look at him in the face. And it was starting to really mess with him mentally. And then this lady finally, he saw her and he was like doing the same thing. He's like, oh man, yeah, I don't want to look, I don't want to look because her face was burned. And finally, she went up, she saw him and she's like, dude, what's wrong with your face? And he's like, and he just couldn't help but laugh. And he's like, are you kidding me? Like your face is over here like burned. It's pretty much gone. Like, I mean, I'm sure it's probably what he was thinking in his head. He's never really said that out loud. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but then like, here he is. He's got a couple of scars. I mean, his face was probably worse back then, and that's what he's talked about. But still, it's just like it's funny because they both it's funny but not funny that they both had, facial injuries, and then she's just like, dude, what happened to your face? Like, just trying to like make light of it. And he was able to open up because of that. And honestly, it's actually changed his life completely because of that one conversation. So you never know how your message can impact somebody and what emotions will come up because of that, and how it could really free somebody. Just kind of go back to what you were just saying, that it it may not mean much to us, but for somebody else it could mean a lot, or they could have just started going through this situation and they don't know what to do. And here you're like, I've been through it for the past 10 years. Not a big deal for me now, but I'm going to go ahead and share the story. And now they're like, oh man, I really could have used that right now, Adam. I really appreciate you sharing that story.
Well, I find that people carry so much weight on their shoulders every
Hmm.
day. Like they just walk around with all this weight and all this baggage, and they're really looking for that story to connect with. Like they
Hmm.
want that story. They've been looking for it somewhere. And honestly, like, yeah, it's the same thing. Like I have a scar on the side of my head.
Yeah.
And I used to get made fun of when I was a kid. Like I had to go through like speech classes, physical therapy classes, occupational therapy classes. I had to go through all that. And I also had to go through getting bullied. But, once you start to embrace it, because like in my earlier 20s, I started growing my hair out longer, I grew the beard out longer, and it covered up the scar and like nobody could see it.
Mm.
but the symptoms were still there. And so people would ask and I would just brush it off. But like I found that once you embrace it, like Andy does, like Andy could grow a beard long enough that he could cover all the scars,
Yeah.
but he doesn't. And, part of that's because that's who he is. And that's why, I went back and I cut my hair short again because this is part of who I am.
Yeah.
And Sean Whalen talks about it. He says to remember who the fuck you are.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think to take that story and really make it a piece of you, that makes your public speaking that much better. Because now, if I were to get up on a stage and talk about that story, it would have that, in my opinion, it had that much more impact
Mm-hmm.
than what it did, like say 10 years ago.
Oh yeah, I agree. Because yeah, 10 years ago you were just starting to get through it, but now you've been through it for 10 more years, dealing with it. You can definitely tell. Obviously, we're talking about it right now, and you have no problem talking about it. I mean, you even turned your head to show the scar real quick, like, "Hey, this is on video." I mean, I know we're not, in front of 1,000 people or a big group or anything like that, just from this video, but still, you're putting it out there. You don't care. And one thing that was really interesting with Andy when he's talked about like growing his business at the beginning, they go to all these shows for fitness, fitness conventions and stuff. And they have a supplement store, and now it's fairly large at this point, but people wouldn't remember their name, the company name or their name, but they would start talking, and then somehow to come around and be like, be like, "Oh, you so and so," and they're like, I'm not sure," and there's like, the dude with the scars. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. And so it's like it actually helped his business because people remember the scars. I mean, I don't know if anybody really wants to be remembered for that, but hey, I mean, go with it. If that's how people are remembering you to start, to work with it. Like, hey, if you got some like weird quirk that you got, maybe it's not a physical scar, maybe it's a weird quirk or something that you do, you got a weird voice, whatever it may be, go with it because that's who you are now. I mean, you can't change it. Maybe you didn't have that at one point, now you do. You can't change it. You got to be you. And just like Adam's been doing with speaking on some stages about the the stuff he's went through. I don't want to say trauma because I mean I know some of it's been trauma for you, but I would say you're kind of past that. You're not a trauma victim per se anymore. But the things that you've been through, you're stronger because of that, and you're able to help people because of that. So take your story and create a message around it. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I had the surgery 27 and a half years ago at this point. Like, I didn't know any different.
Yeah.
I'll be 30 in 3 weeks. I literally had that surgery at 18 months old.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I never knew any different. And I never thought there was anything I wasn't capable of because
Mm.
other than being told I couldn't play contact sports, there wasn't really, people would just tell me, oh, you can't do that. And I would go out and do it anyway.
Mm. Mm.
And I would just get it done.
Yeah. So what would you tell somebody that maybe, and I'll call it fortunate because I would think that's fortunate that you had that surgery at such a young age, so you just kind of grew up with it. That's just who you were. Let's say somebody that maybe they were in their teens or 20s or 30s, so they're obviously have lived a life before, let's say, a scar on their face or something that's very apparent, and now they're having to live with that. What would you tell them? What kind of encouragement would you give them?
Well, it's funny because I started putting myself out there. I met a handful of people that went through the exact same thing I went through.
Hmm.
So just by going to my gym and showing up, people saw that like I had something that was a little bit different and they saw that I
Hmm.
still hustled harder than 98% of the people in there. And that
Hmm.
earned me a lot of respect with people that were both able-bodied and also not. And in the time frame that I've been there, one guy came up to me and he asked me, he's like, "Hey dude, you can tell me to go away, but like what happened?" I talked to him and his kid has the same thing, but on his other side. So for me, it's my left hand side. I lost some fine motor skills, and for his son,
Hmm.
it's on his right hand side. There's a girl that's the same age as me. She had a tumor removed that was cancerous 5 years ago. Same symptoms, and another kid came up to me because his brother just found out he has cancer. Same thing. He's gonna have to get the brain surgery, and like the only thing I tell everybody the same thing, and that's that your day is totally up to you. Like how you handle what comes your way is completely up to you. And that's hard. It's both a huge responsibility as well as a huge relief, depending on what you have going on that day. Like, was I struggling to, rotate those tires today? Yeah, because they're fucking heavy. Like they, by the time I got to the end, I was like, man, I'm just ready for this to be done.
Yeah.
But, and I was hurting, and I was tired, and I was hungry, and I was ready for all that to be over with. But it wasn't over with yet. It's not over with until it's done. And I just would tell people that, doctors know a lot, but they don't know you. And there's a lot of things I was told I wouldn't be able to do that I've gone on and done all that and more.
Man. Yeah. So good information there, man. I appreciate you sharing that. And I want to ask from the other perspective. So people that haven't had this happen to them, but maybe they see you in the gym. Well, what's a way that they can approach if they're kind of curious, or maybe they've gotten to know you? Or let's do two scenarios. They don't know you at all, and for some reason they just want to ask for whatever reason. And then also somebody that's kind of gotten to know you a little bit. What's a good way for people to approach? Because I mean, sometimes we're curious as humans. Sometimes we need to, maybe there's a reason why we need to ask just to make sure about things. So what's a good way to approach that conversation?
I think it's different person to person, because if you'd have
Hmm.
asked me 5 years ago, I wasn't secure in who I was yet, or how it affected me. But
Hmm.
if you ask me today, I mean, you could just approach me cold turkey.
Yeah.
You know, it's it really just depends on the person and who they are and what they have going on.
Yeah.
But, I don't think it hurts to ask. I think just be sensible and reasonable about it. As long as you're not walking up
Hmm.
to them, you're like, dude, what happened to your head?
Yeah.
Mo-
Definitely a worse.
most people,
Yeah.
most people are going to be pretty respectful,
Yeah.
especially if you approach it with kindness and sincerity. Like, I had two or three people that, like I said, one of them came up to me and was like, hey, look, man, my son's going through this thing, my brother's going through this thing, and you frame it,
Hmm.
then it's a lot easier for people to kind of answer those questions.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a great way. If you could frame it that way, hopefully you don't have to, but I mean, if you have that situation, I think that's definitely a great way to frame it. And then, well, I guess that it was the same guy, but he said, "Hey, you can tell me, screw off or whatever, like get away if you don't." But then he asked a question, but he had a reason to ask it. So I think that would be a good approach. Like probably approach I would take. Like if I've kind of gotten to know somebody, it'd be more I've gotten to know them. I wouldn't just ask like say you out of the blue, like, "Hey, man, you can tell me to get away, whatever, or you don't have to answer, but what's up with that scar?" Like, I definitely wouldn't ask that. I would have a car, like, get to know you first before asking that question about that. But I appreciate you sharing that, man. I
Well, I
think it's
think it's
important for
hard
people to
because,
know.
like, a lot of people, like I said, it left physical symptoms. So I don't have
Mhm.
as much flexion in some of my joints, and I walk with a drop foot, which
Yeah.
comes across as a limp. So people think that I got hurt, but I'm not
Mm.
actually hurt. So out of concern, they'll ask right away. They're like, "Oh, dude, are you hurt? Like, are you okay? Did you break your hip? Like, what happened?" And it's like,
Mm.
no, bro. If you've known me for any length of time, this is just who I am and how I
Yeah.
walk. And actually, like, since I started working out more consistently, my gait's improved, so it's less noticeable, but it's still there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, Adam, I want to ask you one last question here. I appreciate you sharing all the information you shared so far, really opening up the way you have. But the question I like to ask all my guests is if you had one message you could share for the rest of your life, what would that message be?
Hmm. I think my message would probably be to trust your gut, because every time I followed my gut, I I ended up on the better side of things. And it doesn't mean it wasn't difficult to go through it, but you know, I every time I trust my gut, I end up getting a little bit better, a little bit stronger, a little bit faster. And sometimes, especially the more you work on yourself, the more your gut starts to tell you to do the right thing.
Mm.
Right. So sometimes I just hear that voice in my head. It's like, well, talk less and do more. Okay, cool. Time to go out and get it done. Doesn't matter what the cost is. Doesn't matter how bad you're hurting. It doesn't matter how much you sweat today. Just go out and get it done.
Love it, man. Trust that gut for sure. That's definitely been something that's helped me out in the long run, especially in situations I'm not sure what call to make. I just go with the gut decision, and I would say 9 times out of 10, it's definitely led me in the right direction. And usually it's a lot easier direction to go in. And if it didn't quite work out the way I thought it would based on that gut decision, just kind of had to roll with the punches from there. But most of the time, that gut knows exactly what to do. It's always makes the better decision for sure. So if people want to follow you, get to know more about you, and maybe ask some questions to you, where is the best place for them to reach out to you?
I'm pretty easy to find on social. I'm on Facebook and Instagram primarily.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm on TikTok too, but it's just the Adam Dupuis, spelled out TheAdamDupuis.
Awesome. Well, Adam, man, appreciate it. Guys, make sure that you go follow him, give him some love on this. Definitely appreciate you coming on the show and sharing the value that you did.
Yeah, man, anytime. I really appreciated you inviting me on.
Of course, man.